Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Unused Content in Zelda, the series where we look at removed assets and concepts that didn't quite make the final cut for some of your favorite Zelda titles. Apparently, it's been almost a year since the last episode of the series was uploaded back in January, and since we started off the year with an episode, why not end it off with one? We'll be covering a variety of games in today's video, including Breath of the Wild, Ocarina of Time, and Minish Cap. Let's get right into it. Some may recall that in the last episode, I began by looking at all of the out-of-bounds secrets Skyward Sword had to offer. Chests, bird statues, and doors which led to some pretty bizarre scenarios. I mean, who can forget the classic Bokoblin scream every time the player landed from a fall? This time I thought I'd start off with some out-of-bounds secrets from another Zelda game, that being Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild's world is filled with numerous secrets and collectibles, one of those being chests. But among the hundreds of these all across Hyrule, there are some that are unobtainable through normal means. A total of 5 out-of-bounds chests have been accounted for. One in Hateno Village, which was placed below the terrain and therefore will fall into the void once spawned. A second and third chest close to Eris Beach, the first buried in the ocean floor, which for some reason can't be pulled out of the sand. The other spawning underneath the map, which slowly falls into the void similar to Hateno's. Same goes for the fourth chest, located on the east side of Rossa Lake, and the fifth found at Upland Zorana. It is possible to access these individual chests with the use of cheats, but what's more impressive is that the player can get these chests legitimately by using a variety of glitches. Tricks such as ollie clipping to get out of bounds, using Cryonis on the water underneath the map, and making use of the travel medallion. What makes some of these chests so difficult to get is 1. The little time you have until the chest falls into the void, and 2. Not being close enough to grab the chests. The first problem wasn't too difficult to solve, as all you had to do was stay outside of the chest's spawning range until you were in a position to get it, and by making use of the stasis and bomb mechanics, it was possible to build up kinetic energy in an object and redirect it with a well-timed explosion for the player to grab. But one chest in particular remained elusive to players for the longest time, and at one time was thought to be impossible to open: the chest at Eris Beach. Not to be confused with the first one buried in the sand, which is possible to get, although it requires a lot of patience. I'm talking about the one that spawns underneath the map. One of the biggest problems with this chest is that all of the underground spots a player could theoretically place a Cryonis block are outside the chest's spawning range. But remember what I said previously. It was thought to be impossible. On June 30th of this year, user Kleric, with the help of El Duende and Let Me Think of a Username, uploaded a video where he manages to open this chest without the use of any hacks. It's a super complicated process which makes use of a variety of glitches, and instead of me trying to properly explain what's going on, I highly recommend watching the video. A link to it will be in the description below. If people are wondering what's in these out-of-bounds chests, it's nothing that amazing. Just a purple rupee, opal, amber, knight's shield, and soldier's bow. But it's less about the contents and more so the satisfaction of knowing how these once thought to be impossible chests are obtainable. The fact that people continue to make new discoveries in this now 4-year-old game shows just how much love and detail was put into it. Many consider this to be their favorite Zelda game of the series, even with some of its flaws. One complaint often brought up is the Dark Beast Ganon face of the final boss, since it's less of a boss and more of an interactive cutscene. But what if I told you that this fight may have been different in prior builds? You see, every enemy in Breath of the Wild has things they can and can't take damage from. For example, a Bokoblin will drown in water while Lizalfos are able to swim. This is one of numerous quote-unquote flags that enemies have in-game, others being things such as whether Urbosa's Fury deals damage to an enemy or not, or what happens when they fall in lava. Strangely enough, one flag exists in-game for the damage dealt by Dark Beast Ganon's laser attacks. This would make sense if enemies appeared in the final battle, however, this isn't the case. In fact, if the player clips out of bounds and explores Hyrule, you soon realize that most enemies won't spawn when the Dark Beast Ganon phase is active. This suggests that at one time enemies may have appeared alongside Dark Beast Ganon, and it makes you wonder if this part of the final boss was different in previous versions of the game. It's a question that we'll likely never know the answer to. This really makes me want to go and replay Breath of the Wild to see if there are any other undiscovered secrets about this game. In fact, I think I'll go start a playthrough right now. It's dangerous to go alone, take this. I don't remember this being part of the game. Hold on a second, it's telling me to check my Sheikah slate. Well, everything seems in order. Wait, the heck is this? Were these strange pictures always here? Let's see now. NordVPN? What's a NordVPN? VPN stands for Virtual Private Network, a service that protects your internet connection and privacy online. It creates an encrypted tunnel for your data, protects your online identity by hiding your IP address, and allows you to use public Wi-Fi hotspots safely. Hide your IP securely, instant VPN connection, worldwide access. That one's pretty cool. If you watch a lot of Netflix, it means you have access to region-blocked content by simply switching your server. Strict no logs policy. And it looks like you can use your NordVPN account on more than just computers. Super useful if you're traveling a lot and only have access to your phone. From what I've heard, I think you can connect up to 6 devices to a single account. If only there was a link to sign up and possibly get a discount. Okay, well, technically you're not wrong there, but I mean the other link. Nope. Definitely not. Oh, at this point you're just messing with me. Oh, there we go. NordVPN.com/NintendoBC for a huge discount and 1 extra month for free? Nice. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and remember to check out the link in the description if you're interested in signing up. That's NordVPN.com/NINTENDOBC. It's no secret that Ocarina of Time is packed with files never actually used in-game. It's the one entry that has been present in every single episode of the series thus far, and with the huge data leak which occurred last year, it's likely that I'll have a couple videos solely dedicated to the unused content of that game in the future. But for now, let's talk about some of the game's unused text. Those who have played Ocarina of Time likely know about the Bigoron sword. It's the most powerful weapon in the game and can be obtained through completing a very lengthy trading sequence. The quest ends when you exchange the claim check for the Bigoron sword. Well, there's another weapon in the game that looks identical to the Bigoron sword found in Goron City. The Giant's Knife can be purchased from Metagoron for 200 rupees, and technically is as powerful as the Bigoron sword, although it will break after 4 to 8 hits, turning into the broken Giant's Knife. Now, Link can still use a sword, but it's not nearly as powerful and can't be paired with the Hylian shield as it's a two-handed weapon. The Giant's Knife has no other use in this game, making the item essentially useless. However, some unused text in the game suggests that the Giant's Knife was once going to be a part of the trading sequence for the Bigoron sword. The player would have exchanged it for the much better version, given that the Bigoron sword never breaks. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Both Metagoron and Bigoron are siblings, and the weapons they make look visually the same. And as said previously, the Giant's Knife has no purpose in the game other than breaking. In fact, when I was making my Scams and Zelda video, I had to double check that the Giant's Knife wasn't part of the trading sequence because I could have sworn it was. It would have at least sort of justified the purchase since you'd later trade it for a much better sword, but I suppose that means that in the final version you at least have 200 extra rupees to spend on something else, so yay? There were a few more discoveries made when digging through the text. One was the Japanese text on an unused sign which translated to Fortress City Hyrule. The English script reads Hyrule Castletown, but both the Japanese and English dev notes refer to it as Fortress Town Hyrule and Hyrule Fortress Town. This may have been an earlier name for what would later be referred to as Castletown. In one of the temples of the game, the Forest Temple, the Hero of Time faces off against a phantom version of Ganondorf. At the end of the battle, Ganon berates the ghost for losing and banishes it to a gap between dimensions. Similar to most dungeon bosses in the series, Phantom Ganon doesn't have any lines. He just sort of shows up to fight the hero. A detail which may have differed in prior versions, as there does exist one line of text that, according to the dev notes, would have been said by Phantom Ganon. The following is a direct translation of the Japanese text. Thou who art imprisoned by my magic, may the gap between dreams and reality bleach your wretched corpse. and what's said in the English version is fairly accurate to the translations. The bit with the gap between dreams and reality may be connected to Phantom Ganon's description being labeled as an evil spirit from another dimension. I can't help but wonder if the setting for this boss battle would have been different in previous iterations of the game. Perhaps the plan was to have Link fighting Phantom Ganon in his own dimension, which would have been pretty cool. The fact that we have unused dialogue for a character that doesn't even speak in the final version is interesting enough. Another bit of unused dialogue is said by Darunia once the player clears Dodongo's cavern. He mentions naming his child after the hero, which acts as foreshadowing for future events, since the player does meet a young Goron with the same name as the player. Some other text suggests that the player would have had to visit Zelda right after getting the Goron's Ruby, as stated by Gaebora. You don't have to do this in the final version, although Zelda does have unique dialogue if the player chooses to go talk to her. And Gaebora's dialogue can still be triggered in the game, but it's technically impossible through normal gameplay since it only happens after learning Saria's song and before Zelda's Lullaby. Perhaps the original plan was to have the player learn Zelda's Lullaby on the second visit, but I'm just spitballing here. It's amazing how something as simple as unused text can lead to its own theories and speculation. Man, do I love the art style of Minish Cap. There's just something about it that stands out compared to all the other top-down Zelda games. Not to speak badly about A Link to the Past, I adore that aesthetic as well, but Minish Cap sprites are insanely good looking. I think one of the reasons I love it so much is because they have a very Wind Waker-ish style to them. And if there's one Zelda game I love to death, it's Wind Waker HD. That game looks gorgeous with its cartoony look and cell shading. Minish Cap is actually the first top-down Zelda game ever to be covered in the series, and that's because these games unfortunately don't have nearly as many unused assets as the 3D ones. I suppose it makes sense. I mean, 3D Zelda games tend to be much bigger in design, but there are some unused assets and ideas worth talking about. There's incomplete versions of the game's many dungeons still within the game files, including the Deepwood Shrine, Cave of Flames, Fortress of Winds, Palace of Winds, the list goes on. Unfortunately, I couldn't find high-quality files for the finished versions of each dungeon. The best I could do were these scanned images from the Nintendo Player's Guide for Minish Cap, though it's very low res. But just by looking at the Deepwood Shrine, it shows how much was changed. The only room that bears any sort of resemblance is the entrance and central chamber. Other parts of the dungeon do share some similarities to the final versions, though drastic changes were made to the overall shapes of these rooms. But one of these maps in particular sticks out from the rest, since it has no connection to the ones in-game. Perhaps it was meant to be a mini-dungeon similar to the Royal Crypt. The game has two versions of this map, both with different tile sets. Now, at first I thought that would be it for this segment, since there wasn't much to talk about. That is, until I realized you could play these maps in-game. Yeah, turns out you can use GameShark codes to force these areas to load in, allowing you to walk around the chambers, which is pretty cool. Some rooms have puzzles and even chests that can be opened. Now, obviously, much of it's unfinished. You can hardly call these quote-unquote dungeons. For a lot of them, it's only the layout itself that has some sort of semblance of being complete. Most puzzle elements can't be interacted with and simply act as static objects. A lot of the switches can't be stepped on, and some cracked walls won't get destroyed by bombs. Some maps contain movable statues, however, none of these serve any purpose. In general, the maps vary in appearance. Some are filled with random tile sets and objects, with others being a complete mess. The Elemental Sanctuary is one of the more prominent examples of this. It gets even worse as you progress through the rooms. Same goes for Hyrule Castle's map, although it's not nearly as bad. What's interesting is that you can use certain tiles to clip out of bounds, and when you do, Link will be able to walk over almost anything, sort of like if you were using an out-of-bounds cheat code. I think this is happening because the game puts Link on a higher level or layer of the map, so none of the tiles on the lower layers affect his movement. Something I learned when messing around is that you can walk up to a movable statue and press R to grab it, which will put Link back on the main level of the map. On the topic of the statues, some are set in very odd places. There's a couple of them out of bounds, and while you can't push them, it's possible to grab and pull them back into the map. Some of these rooms also hold stone tablets, but all of them say ... It's probably the default message that's shown when nothing's written. And the Palace of Winds has some Igor statues that won't react when you shoot an arrow at them. The game files also include unused maps of smaller rooms, and some of them have interesting details. The first one appears to be a dungeon entrance of sorts, and it's believed to have once been the entrance to the Temple of Droplets. Entering this dungeon warps you to the Deepwood Shrine dungeon, and going out the other direction takes the player just outside the Temple of Droplets dungeon. It makes sense for this to be that dungeon's entrance, since in the final version of the game, the player simply uses his magic platform to shrink down to the size of a Minish, and that's how you enter the dungeon. There's also this cave with water and a chest. Opening this gives Link a fairy. In fact, that's what's in all chests. It's possible that it's the default item given to the player if no specific treasure is set to appear. Also, for some reason, chests on higher levels of these unused maps can't be opened, even after being prompted to press the R button. And this also applies to some chests on the main level. Lastly, there are numerous maps of Minish houses, all filled with chests that are arranged to spell Nashi, meaning nothing or without. One of the more interesting finds is this map featuring a series of rooms, all with their own Clone Link block puzzles. Unlike most other maps, these puzzles can be completed, although for some reason doing so closes the temple doors. One of the rooms also holds a strange switch that I don't recall being in the final version of the game, but more importantly, this same room was featured in a shot of the E3 2004 trailer of Minish Cap. So that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, I couldn't explore all of the Royal Crypt map. The game put me in the bottom room, which is lined with trapdoors, and while the ones on the far left and right can be destroyed with bombs, there is an invisible wall not allowing me to access the other chambers. Also, for some reason, these blade traps saw things move incredibly slow, and I don't know why. And going back to those two maps of the unused mini-dungeons, it's not just the aesthetics that vary between both versions, but also the puzzles in each being completely different. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of interesting, because layout-wise, it's sort of similar, but the puzzles are different for some reason. So it's not just a change in the aesthetics. But I have to say that of all the unused dungeon maps in the game, the Fortress of Winds has to be the most empty. Others such as the Cave of Flames and Deepwood Shrine feel much more finished. There's actually a lot more to cover in Minish Cap than I originally thought, such as unused enemies and items, and some references to past Zelda games. However, I'd like to hold off on that for a future video as to not cover everything at once. That's going to be it for this episode of Unused Content in Zelda. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, then please consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help greatly with what I do. And I hope you all had a fantastic Christmas. I've been NintendoBlackCrisis, and I'll see you all next time.